just 2 months after we broke the story of Baby Lamb, Colleyville police started interviewing witnesses. Two of those they interviewed were Joni's daughter, Rebecca Lamb Weiss, and her husband, Jonathan, or J.W. Weiss.
For years, Doug Weiss built his reputation around helping people confront their darkest struggles. But now, Rachel and Rebecca are stepping forward with claims that could force Daystar viewers to see him differently. What they say happened behind the scenes raises questions about what was known, what was hidden, and why nobody spoke sooner. And the deeper their story goes, the more disturbing the unanswered questions become. The serious allegation that shattered everything. Every family war needs a spark, and this one traces back to a single devastating concern. Jonathan Lamb and his wife Susie said they became convinced their young daughter had been inappropriately touched by a relative connected to the family, someone who spent time around her at company events and family gatherings. Much of what they described reportedly traced back to a family retreat at a rented vacation house in Florida in August of 2021, a trip that would later resurface again and again in interviews and police files for years afterwards. They raised the concern internally first, and they say it was dismissed. According to Jonathan, that concern is the real reason he lost his job at Daystar in November of 2024, not the performance issue the network cited publicly at the time. When the concern eventually reached the Colleyville Police Department, it stopped being something this family could manage quietly behind closed doors. It became a matter of record, and it forced two women who had stayed silent in public for years to finally go on the record themselves, in two very different rooms, saying two very different things. Rachel's public defense. Of the two sisters, Rachel Lamb Brown chose the loudest and most public path forward. Her husband, Josh Brown, was the family member at the center of the concerns her own brother and sister-in-law had raised. And rather than waiting quietly while investigators did their work, Rachel went on the offensive almost immediately. She shared results from a polygraph examination her husband had taken in July of 2024.
To be clear, Josh has never been charged with a crime, and the police investigation involving Baby Lamb was closed last May due to insufficient evidence.
Conducted by an examiner named Ralph Standifer. According to what Rachel shared publicly, the results showed a 99.5% statistical probability that Josh had been telling the truth. She was careful to point out that the examiner had no connection to Doug Weiss, and that Weiss himself did not even know the test had happened until after it was already done, almost as though she anticipated people assuming the whole thing had been arranged behind the scenes. Rachel did not stop at defending her husband either. She publicly denied specific claims her brother and sister-in-law had made, disputing details down to where certain conversations supposedly took place, and she framed the entire situation as something rooted in Jonathan's resentment rather than genuine concern, tying it directly back to his disappointment over not becoming the network's next leader, and his discomfort with their mother's remarriage. It also matters who Rachel actually is inside this company. As Daystar's director of communications, she was not simply defending her husband the way any wife might. She was also the person whose job it has been to manage how the network's image survives moments exactly like this one, which makes it difficult to separate her confidence as a wife from her instincts as an executive. It is worth pausing on just how confident that response actually was. A polygraph result shared publicly, defending a husband against allegations connected to a child in the family, all while positioning her own brother as the one acting in bad faith. She remained visible on air, stood up to speak at her mother's memorial, and has continued appearing in Daystar programming alongside her husband, as though this entire chapter of the family's history had already been closed and settled. Except it was not settled for everyone in that family, because when her own sister sat down in that same interview room with police, she did not sound anywhere near as certain as Rachel did. What Rebecca actually said behind closed doors. Rebecca Lamb Weiss and her husband, known publicly as J.W. Weiss, gave police a very different picture than the one Rachel had already given the public. Their interviews took place in January of 2025 with Detective Nick Garcia, with portions of those conversations happening while Daystar's own legal counsel sat in the room. Unlike Rachel, Rebecca did not walk into that interview with a confident position already prepared. What came out of those conversations instead was a woman actively working through her own uncertainty in real time. She and her husband referenced a document from several years earlier, written by J.W. himself, describing concerns and warning signs he had noticed regarding interactions involving the child at the center of this case. At one point during her interview, Rebecca said something that has since become the most quoted line from this entire investigation. She told the detective her initial thought was that something had actually happened, and that revisiting the old document and speaking with another household employee had confirmed a feeling she already carried underneath the surface. That same household employee reportedly told investigators she was afraid of losing her job if she spoke up at all. A small detail that says a great deal about what it is like to work for a family this powerful and this used to being protected. But Rebecca did not stop there. She also expressed real distrust toward Jonathan and Susie, saying they had essentially cut off contact and had not warned anyone sooner, even though the Weisses had their own young child who could have been at risk too. She said plainly that she did not fully trust anyone on either side of this fight. Her husband even asked the detective what a realistic timeline might look like if more evidence surfaced, a question that suggests this family knew even then that a closed case might not be the final word. That kind of admission does not happen by accident inside a family this practiced at staying on message in public. It is part of why Rebecca's account has carried a different weight than anything said publicly by anyone else close to Daystar, and why people who followed this case closely still bring her words up first. A woman who suspected something serious may have happened to a child in her own family still could not bring herself to fully trust the people raising the alarm about it. That is the reaction of someone standing in the middle of a family so fractured that even the people trying to do the right thing cannot agree on who is telling the truth. And that fracture did not heal with time. If anything, what happened months later, around Joni's own death, shows it only grew worse. The death nobody in this family learned about the same way. For as long as this family has fought in public, they have never fully agreed on one basic fact, and that is what actually happened in Joni Lamb's final days. Daystar's own public statement said she died peacefully at her home in Bedford, Texas.
Founder of North Texas-based Daystar television network has died. The network shared on social media that Joni Lamb passed away this morning.
But according to a source who spoke to investigative journalist Julie Roys weeks after the funeral, that is not the complete story. This source claimed Joni actually spent her last 4 days of life at a clinic in Mexico, taken there by Doug Weiss for treatment outside the country, and that she died there on a Thursday after arriving only the Monday before. The same source said that on the morning before her death, Rachel and Rebecca were on air at Daystar, as usual, with no idea their mother was that close to the end. That same source also said she grew suspicious Doug had control of Joni's phone during those final days after a text she received back read, "cold and impersonal," describing having tried everything already. Wording she insisted did not sound anything like the Joni she had known for years. Daystar has never addressed this specific claim publicly, and it remains a single contested account rather than a confirmed one. But it is worth noticing what the two versions have in common rather than only where they conflict. Even the network's own gentler telling, a peaceful passing surrounded by loved ones, still leaves out the one loved one. Every version of this story agrees was missing. What is not disputed is what happened to Jonathan. Joni's own son was never told his mother was dying. His wife Susie wrote online that they had been close by that entire evening and were never given the chance for a final goodbye, adding that despite everything, they had chosen to forgive whoever made that decision. The news that finally reached Jonathan did not come from his sisters or from Doug. It came from Daystar's own corporate attorney, a board member named Tom Callender, roughly 10 minutes before the network announced her death to the entire world on social media. Within hours, Daystar told the public that Joni had already arranged an executive leadership team so operations would continue without interruption. A statement that answered questions about programming schedules while leaving every question about her own son completely untouched. And 10 days before any of this happened, according to that same anonymous source, Joni had already made one final request about her son, a request her daughters were apparently not ready to honor. The promise that disappeared after the funeral. The woman who eventually spoke to Roy's said she felt compelled to get involved because of her own past. She described surviving childhood sexual herself, and said watching this family stay divided while a funeral approached felt like something she could not simply witness from a distance. So she picked up the phone and called Jonathan and Susie directly, hoping to broker some kind of peace before it was too late. According to that same source, Daystar board member Tom Callender told her something remarkable during a phone call in the days after Joni died. He said that 3 weeks before her death, Joni had told him directly, "If Jonathan tries to reach out, give him back Daystar." The source says Callender wept when he shared it with her, and told her repeatedly that they needed to make the reunion happen before it was too late. A meeting between Jonathan, Susie, and his sisters was planned for the Saturday before the funeral. It never happened. Callender reportedly called back to say Rachel and Rebecca were not ready, and that any conversation would have to wait until after the service. At the funeral itself, held at Gateway Church in Southlake, Jonathan and Susie were seated far from the rest of the family, kept off the stage entirely, and sat through a sermon from Pastor Gentizen Franklin that appeared to indirectly rebuke critics of Joni's choices in front of the entire congregation. 2 days later, on the 20th of May, 2026, Callender sent the source a text with a very different message than the one he had given her weeks earlier. He asked her to correct the record and insisted he had never told her anything about Joni's final wishes at all. The source said she was stunned, since this was the same man who had been sobbing with relief on the phone with her only days earlier, and she has since described his refusal to tell Jonathan and Susie the truth directly as one of the most painful parts of this entire ordeal. When Jonathan later commented publicly on learning what his mother reportedly wanted for him, he called it both healing and deeply confirming, and said it matched what his father had communicated about succession before his own death as well. This claim has divided even the people who have followed this family closely for years. Some longtime viewers say the story sounds exactly like a business protecting itself at the expense of a grieving son. Others point out that the source spoke anonymously and that grief can distort memory, and argue the account deserves real skepticism before anyone treats it as settled fact. What almost nobody disputes is the timeline itself, a reconciliation that was promised, delayed, and then flatly denied, all within the same 10 days. Rachel and Rebecca have not addressed any of this publicly, and Daystar has not either. The marriage and the firing behind the silence. This was not the first time this family had chosen image over honesty either. Long before Doug Weiss ever entered the picture, Marcus Lamb carried on a years-long relationship with a woman who worked under him at the network, something journalists who have covered Daystar for years describe as a serious of his position rather than an ordinary affair. Joni stayed, and the network moved on publicly as though nothing had happened. Viewed against that history, the family's instinct to manage its newest crisis, quietly rather than transparently, looks less like an isolated decision and more like a pattern this family has relied on for a very long time. To understand why a family would let a reconciliation slip away so easily, it also helps to remember what they were actually fighting over. Marcus and Joni built Daystar from a single station in Alabama in the mid-1980s into one of the largest evangelical broadcasters in the world, an empire that made every disagreement inside this family a disagreement about far more than money. Doug Weiss married Joni on the 10th of June, 2023, less than 2 years after Marcus Lamb died from complications tied to COVID, and he became her co-host almost immediately after. Jonathan opposed that marriage from very early on, and the tension around it never stayed contained to private conversations. Within roughly a year and a half of that wedding, Jonathan lost the vice president title he had held inside that same company for years. Daystar's official reason pointed to a performance review and a refusal to accept an improvement plan. Jonathan's version points to the concern he and Susie had raised about their daughter, and to his discomfort with his mother's new marriage. Multiple ministry partners who had worked alongside Daystar for years, some with well-known national profiles, quietly paused or ended relationships with the network during this same period, and nobody needed to explain why out loud. The timing alone told longtime viewers everything they needed to know. By the time Joni died, Doug had already quietly stepped back from his daily presence on air.
I lost my wife, Joni Lamb, and many of you know who she is, and she's been an incredible blessing to the world, to the church, and to me personally and to my family.
And no network statement has ever explained what role, if any, he still holds now. Whether he still draws a salary from the network, and how much that salary might be, has never been made public either, which fits a pattern this family has followed for years, answering personal questions with silence and letting speculation quietly fill in the rest. And underneath every part of this family's silence sits a financial picture almost nobody outside Daystar has ever been allowed to see clearly. The money trail and what still is not public. Daystar operates as a nonprofit tied to the Word of God Fellowship, which means it is never required to file the same public financial disclosures other ministries willingly share. That opacity is not new, but it has taken on fresh weight recently. At a board meeting in September of 2023, Jonathan objected when Daystar covered roughly $100,000 of Joni and Doug's honeymoon expenses. According to Jonathan, board member Tom Callender simply gifted that amount to Joni on the spot, rather than reversing the charge. Joni later said she covered part of it with credit card points and repaid the rest personally. Separately, documents reviewed by investigators showed Joni's total compensation climbed to over $1 million a year following Marcus's death, a figure Daystar has never publicly disputed or confirmed on the record. As a church-affiliated nonprofit, Daystar is not required to file the standard public disclosures that would settle these questions once and for all, which is exactly why accountability groups have quietly scrutinized the network's finances for years, long before any of this family drama ever became public. There is a strange irony sitting quietly underneath all of this, too. One of Joni's final executive decisions was launching Daystar Español into Mexico, bringing the network to millions of new households in the same country where, according to that anonymous source, she would spend her very last days. Daystar has built its reach into what the network itself has described as more than 2 billion homes worldwide, and it asks millions of viewers for financial support every single month to keep that reach growing. A ministry operating at that scale is not simply a family business anymore, even if the people currently running it still seem to treat it like one. There is still no public court filing in Tarrant County supporting the more dramatic claims that circulate online. No evidence of secret property transfers or private investigators hired to watch the daughters. Those specific claims remain unsupported by anything in the public record. What is now undeniable is this. A dying woman reportedly asked for her estranged son to be welcomed back into the empire she spent her life building, and months later, he still has not been. More than 100 days after her death, Daystar still has not named a permanent president, an unusually long silence for a network that spent decades building its entire identity around a single family face on camera every day. The board holds control for now, with Rachel and Rebecca remaining the two names most often mentioned as the future of this network, alongside longtime executives such as Chief Financial Officer Arnold Torres. And the one name their mother apparently wanted included in that future is still sitting on the outside, waiting for a phone call that, so far, still has not come. If you think Rachel and Rebecca owe their brother an honest answer about what their mother really wanted, say so in the comments. And tell us whether you believe Daystar will ever be run by anyone outside this one divided family.